Hello grade 11 students, Mr. L here once again for the next part of our Spaceship Greenfoot code tutorials. In this lesson, we're actually going to begin the process of turning our what's currently a flight simulator into an actual interactable game by adding in something to interact with. At this point in time, you should have created a world that looks like something spacey, a hero, some kind of a ship or similar object, with a set of projectiles that are all based around their parent class rules called projectile. I'm going to step you through the code I have here, but before I do, I notice my hero's not in the world yet. I just want to remind you of one thing. If I actually drop my hero in the world, mine changes size for a reason, don't worry. Let me just put it in a good spot and I go, well, before I show this, right now my constructor is really simple. If I go save the world, it's going to actually tell Greenfoot to prepare and add this every time. So when I press reset, it doesn't disappear. I like that. So let's see what my code looks like. When I run this, my ship follows and tracks my mouse wherever it's aiming. And when I press my keys, my ship moves around, always tracking where my mouse is. I like the feel of this control scheme. It's the one that I've chosen to go with for now. When I press my left mouse button, it shoots a laser. When I press my middle mouse button, it shoots missiles. When I press my right mouse button, it shoots fireballs. Notice the rate of fire is different for each weapon. I've customized each of those things here. Let's take a peek over at my code and see what's going on. Now I'm going to go through this really quickly. I'm going to be sharing this baseline code with you so that if you've been struggling in the early parts, you can borrow this to build the next parts up. Or if you want to use your own code, which I recommend, then you can at least refer to mine to see if there's any ideas that you might want to borrow or just to check in your understanding. Notice that I've defined a lot of private variables here. In this scenario, I have lots of different things, particularly three different timers, three different reloaders, because each weapon has its own custom local values. I also had to do some interesting Boolean settings for my mouse being pressed down or not. If you're trying to use the mouse to do interactions in your game, things get a little bit weird at times. It's a bit more complicated than it is for the keyboard. That's something you want to try out. Look through how I do things in the code here or ask me to help you out. I'm not going to go through it in this tutorial here. But you'll see when I construct my hero, I set all these reload timers in the first place, and I've actually resized my ship. I did that just because I feel like the smaller ship works better for the type of game that I'm making. It makes it feel like the world's bigger without having to have like a much bigger monitor. So I just did that here. You're welcome to do that or not do that. I have some of the same getters and setters that I had previously. In my act method, I'm going to process the keys each run. I'm going to process the mouse each run. And I'm going to be reloading or decrementing, we call it, reducing the value of each reload timer each time through. You'll see here my process keys I've set up in the way that I like, where my ship is able to move with the ASW and D keys. And then I've processed my mouse. Now I have, first of all, my tracking turned towards mouse that you should have in your program as well. But I've also added all this functionality in that allows my mouse buttons to tell which weapons to be created. First of all, I set up some logic in the first part for telling the program which mouse button is currently being accessed, and then I create different weapons, a laser, a missile, and a fireball, depending on which mouse button is being pressed, and some other information here. Then, when these things shoot, I have just the same logic here for setting the rotation, adding the object, and then resetting the position of the projectile so that's at the nose of our ship. You'll see that all mine shoot at the very tip of the nose, not in the middle of the ship, so I added an extra functionality in mine. So a lot going on in my ship class. I would recommend taking a look more closely at your own pace to try and understand these things. In my projectile class, it should look very familiar. I have my check boundaries so that it erases or removes this object when it reaches the edge of the world. Otherwise, it's just going to move with the speed that it's been set when I constructed it. The amount of damage that it does is going to start to matter in an upcoming tutorial. How does it get that damage value? Well, each individual weapon sends that damage in its superconstructor. Awesome. Now you'll notice in my fireball one, I added in a bit of extra functionality for it to rotate while it's moving. You'll see that fireball is actually rotating, if you can see that on the screen there, a little bit of an extra kind of animation going on there. All right, so we have our program up and running, but right now it's a flight simulator. Cool, I can shoot, I can move, wonderful, but let's make things more interesting. I need to add in a new actor. I'll be sharing the image for this. You can choose to use a different one if you want, but I'm going to use this rock. I'm going to call it Asteroid. And this is going to be a new actor that I'm going to be adding into the world to have some extra functionality going on here. So what do we want this asteroid to be able to do? Please, if you need to, pause the video at different times. I'm just going to get rid of these comments here. Don't think I need them. So let's think of our starting point. I like to start usually by just writing out my basic constructor, public asteroid. I might want more information in here, but I just want the constructor present because it needs to be there to create this object in the first place. I also need to think about what private variables, what private attributes I want this asteroid to have. And for my asteroid here, it's going to have two private variables. It's going to have an integer that defines its size, and I'm going to have another private integer called health. Each of these things are going to come into play later on in important ways. So I'm just going to pop something open here. I don't want to make any little errors. Where's my other piece of code? Just going to pop something open in the background here. So the basic idea that I'm working with here is trying to just think of the concept that I want to be created. Wow, this is really being weird. All right, that I want to be implemented. What do I need this asteroid to be able to do? I need it to have a size. And if you've ever played an asteroid style game before, you're going to find that when you blow up an asteroid, it doesn't just disappear immediately. It actually explodes into smaller chunks. Think about like smashing a rock. You have smaller pebbles breaking off from it. So I want the size to be adaptable and generalizable. I also want it to have health so that it's not just a one-hit thing that ends it. I can add some customization into how hard it is to defeat this. So I'm going to define those private variables, and also, actually I'm going to add one more in here, the speed. For now, I'm going to actually define the speed that all asteroids will have. If you want to extend your functionality to have variable speeds, that'll be up for you to do a little bit later. All right, here is how I'm going to be constructing my asteroid. We're going to introduce one new idea here that we haven't seen before. I'm going to be creating a second constructor. Now, Greenfoot isn't going to like this. It says constructor asteroid is already defined in asteroid class. I cannot have two identical constructors for the same object. That's not allowed. But what I can do is have a slightly different constructor by having it instead receive some different information. These constructors behave differently, so they're both allowed. We call this overloading the constructor. It means that I could construct the asteroid this way, or I could construct it this way. I have some options. I could also use both of them, as we'll see here. I'm going to be using this first constructor to create the first asteroids. And this second constructor, this will be used to create all asteroids, depending on the scenario we're talking with. And this is a bit tricky to understand the first time through. But here's what I'm going to do. The first asteroids I create, I'm just going to create a normal asteroid with no sent parameters. This asteroid is going to perform this 50. Now, what does that mean? This is a word that says access this class, access this current class. And I am going to be accessing the constructor in this class that accepts an integer, which I just created right down here. So by doing this, I'm actually running this afterwards, but I'm just sending it the value of 50. Now you might wonder, why don't I just ignore this altogether? Why don't I just erase this and just do that here? Well, the reason is that this sets up my first layer of asteroids, and then this allows us to be more customized in the future. It gives us options. So what should this asteroid do? Well, it's going to be receiving a size The first asteroid we're setting at size 50. Other ones might be smaller or a different value of size depending on how you want to construct your world. I'm going to be setting my variable inside my class to the same value that's being sent in the constructor. Notice they have the same name, but Greenfoot isn't confused. That's because these are different hierarchies of information. This here is a local variable in the class itself. But this is even more specialized. It's a local variable only within this one constructor. It has like its own unique identity just inside of here. Nothing outside of it knows it exists. I want this information to be existing in the wider class. I want it to know all that information. So here's what I'm going to do for this. I'm going to say this dot size equals size. And at first glance, this is going to seem really weird, but it makes sense. This dot size means the class its size, which is this, will equal size, which is the local size inside the constructor, which is this. So whatever I pass into here becomes the value in this object that's created from this class rules. And that's the way that I assign an external piece of information to the internal data really nicely and succinctly. We're going to add some more things to this constructor, but let's actually jump down here to our act method. So this asteroid is going to be able to be created. I set the image for it already. Let's just see what happens if I place one in my world and hit run. Okay, the asteroid exists. My lasers and fireballs and missiles should pass right through it. It doesn't do anything. It's pretty boring. So we need to add some functionality to it. So I'm just going to add this asteroid in the world and go save the world, just so that it's permanently there. So every time I reset it, I don't have to replace it in the world. And in our act method, let's have it move at the speed that we set, just for the class in general. Now you'll notice that it moves and it's gone. Let me just check something here. We are used to, maybe in your project, the edge of the world being a boundary that you cannot pass. You'll see in my project here that I have no problem moving away outside of the side of the world and back again. My asteroid has also flown off the edge of the world and is continuing forever. The reason for that is because I access the world constructor slightly differently. We're used to only putting in the first three values, but there's a fourth value that we have the option of putting in here. Let me pull up my API and show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to head back into, let's go to class, to world. The world constructor. There's two options. And again, we've seen overriding before, just like I showed you with our asteroid where we create two constructors. Well, we've seen many, many times that there's many different constructors that are available, and we access the one we want by putting in the right information. One of them that we're used to using is just the width, the height, and the cell size of 1 we usually use. The second one also has this Boolean bounded. If this is true, and it automatically is true if we don't put it in, then it means that there are walls to our world. If it's false, our world is wall-less, and things can travel off and outside of it, which is what we wanted here. So that's where that comes from, that functionality that I'm going to be working with. So when our asteroid moves, it moves at the speed of 4 in its initialized direction, which is just 0 degrees or to the right. And that's a bit of a problem because an asteroid that only moves in one direction, we can think of me adding another asteroid into my world. I'm going to save it again. When I run it, they both go the same direction. I don't like that functionality. That's kind of boring. Let's make it more interesting. When I create an asteroid, I want to also set its rotation in a more interesting way. This method requires me to put in a number between 0 and 360. So I could just put in 180, and let's see what happens here. Okay, it goes the other way. Maybe if we want just a one-directional set of enemies, that would be okay, but I'm going to up this to the next level by using a randomizer. In my Greenfoot class, I can get a random number, and I can toss it the numbers I want it to roll in the range of, one extra thing there. So from 0 to 360, I'm going to get a random number. Anywhere in a full circle could be any random number. You'll notice that these are looking slightly different now because they're facing different directions. When I reset it, each time it's going to randomize the direction they travel. Each time we get a unique circumstance to have to deal with, which makes, at least I think, for a much more interesting game. Alright, on to our next problem, and maybe the last one we'll solve for today. I don't want these asteroids disappearing. I want them to do something called wrap, which means when they reach the edge, they reappear on the other side, kind of like this is just a small little window of the universe that things are reappearing back and forth in. So I need to program the functionality of this asteroid to be able to do something called wrapping. I'm going to call this method world wrapper, and this is what's going to allow my asteroid to reposition itself as necessary. In the act, I want each moment for my asteroid to check if it needs to do this wrapping method. The functionality within this method is going to be access to each tick of the world, and we'll access this functionality. Follow along with what it is that I do for my code. I'm going to show you the first step, and then I recommend after it that you pause and see if you can implement the rest on your own before me, or you can just watch if you're feeling really stuck. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say if the x coordinate of my asteroid is less than 0. Let's think of what that means for a sec. The x coordinate is less than 0 means if it's gone off the left side of the screen over here. If it's less than 0, then I want it to reappear over here at the exact same position vertically, just on the other side of the screen. So how do I get it to reappear like that? First of all, I'm going to set location. I'm going to access this method. It's going to let me just teleport it wherever I want. I want to reposition it at the edge of the world. What's that size? Well, I can run my getWorld method, and I can get the width of the world right from the world itself. Get the width. I don't want the height to change. Get y, meaning just get the current y coordinate of the asteroid and repeat it again. Let's see if we can see this. Oh, they both went the same direction. We've got to get one of these heading off on the left side of the screen. Here we go. We should see this one reappearing over here. There it goes. What just happened there? When it reached the edge of the world on the left-hand side, I told it to change the location to the farthest edge of the world at the same height. You try now and see if you can implement the right-hand side, the top, and the bottom scenarios for getting this wrapping to work, and then unpause the video and see if what you did worked alongside mine. Alright, hopefully you tried that out, and hopefully it was successful. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say if getX is greater than the width of the world. I could program in a specific number for the width of my world, but I want it to be generalized, so whatever I change my world size to, this will always work the same for it. Generalization, awesome. I'm going to set my location to 0 and get y. Why 0? Because that's the left-hand side of the screen. Alright, if that's not the scenario that we're dealing with, now I need to deal with the top and the bottom. For the top, if get y is less than 0, let's see what we do here. I'm going to set the location to get x. I don't want the x position to change, but I do need to adjust the y position. So here at the top, if it's below 0, I want it to set it to the height of the world. So I'm going to get world and get height. And finally, if get y is greater than my world height, hopefully you can think this through yourself. Set location, the x shouldn't change, and I'm going to set it to 0 for y because I want it to go to the bottom of the screen. I haven't made any typos. What we should see here is the asteroids forever looping around the world the tornadoes. There's a little bit of glitchiness in how the visuals work at certain spots. I could refine this if I wanted to make it look better. I think some of my directions are changing in the wrong way here. Or am I just thinking of looking at the wrong asteroid? Oh, it looks pretty good right now. So, what do I have here? I have a world in which my spaceship functions just like normal, and these asteroids are now moving around my screen in kind of interesting ways each time I run the game. Let's just drop in a third one just to see even more what's going on here in their own kind of unique manner. In the next tutorial, we're going to actually code the ability to interact with it, both for the asteroids to interact with our ship, causing damage, maybe even destroying it, as well as our weapons interacting with the asteroids, doing the damage that we've already programmed. They each have their own different damage amount, but they're actually be able to do something and affect these asteroids individually. See you in the next one.